I'll call in Carrie first before the panel comes in. To say the least about Carrie, she's been my mentor from the time I've met her. She's my soul sister. I think middle of the night, if I call her, she would answer my phone, and I would too, actually. We've been a strength to each other in this fight, and we hope to go a long way. It's just the beginning of the journey. This panel is amazing. And would you like to come and call the panel?
Thank you.
Thank you for all your support.
I literally just rolled off the plane from Baltimore, actually, which is much less warm than here. So happy to be here. I want to invite the members of our panel to come forward. We have, as Nyla said, just an incredible panel with extraordinary experience, and it is listed in the bulletin, and you can also see it on the website. So we're not actually going to go through everybody's bio, but I want to list who we have with us. And I want to invite you, when I call your name, just to come up and find a chair. We have a lot of people. We have an hour and 15 minutes, and we have a great program. So Akshay Potatil, Jay Silverman, Anita Raj, Ramesh Rao, Todd Hammond, Mari Chris Hernandez, and Elisa Omar. Will you please join me at the table? I wanted to start by not, as I said earlier, going through the bios, but really giving each member of our panel an opportunity to speak from their own personal experience, because the personal stories are so incredible. And so just take a few minutes to say why it is that you got involved in this movement. As we heard, it is a movement. And then, you want me to go over there? Okay, I'll go over there. Why it is you got involved in this movement, and just a little bit about what your role is in it. And I'm going to start. So the organization that I lead is PCI, Project Concern International. We are headquartered here in San Diego, and we're very involved in many different aspects of the anti-trafficking work here. You heard Chancellor Kosel speak. PCI and UCSD are founding members of the San Diego Business Alliance Against Trafficking. This is incredibly important because UCSD is the largest employer here in San Diego, and then also, of course, has so many students. So it was a natural partnership. We're so grateful to the Chancellor for his leadership in this area. We're also a really proud member of the San Diego Trafficking Prevention Collaborative, and we are a partner with several other organizations, Protect and No More. We are supported in an astounding way by UBS, and we're so grateful to UBS, and our friends from UBS are here, and we're so grateful to you. This is an extraordinary partnership that offers educational and advocacy services for teachers and students, but it does more than that. It offers a really targeted, intensive, evidence-based interventions to young people who live in areas of high risk. And it gives them a safe space where they can talk about trafficking, where they can learn the tactics used by traffickers. They can speak up, as we heard, is so important. And they can really gain confidence that they can take control of their lives. And it's the partnership between Protect No More and PCI that's so strong, and I'm just grateful for that. So in terms of who inspires me or how I got involved in this business, first of all, I want to say I'm inspired by all of you. This is an incredible group of stakeholders, different people from all parts of San Diego and, in fact, our country and the world. And you are an inspiration to me. But I'm also inspired by people like Fayette. And Fayette is a young woman. She's 17 years old. She comes from a very tough background. Her mother suffers from mental health and substance abuse issues, and her father is rarely around. And when he is, he's abusive, and he is very difficult. Fayette is working hard in school. She also tries to help her family make ends meet by having a part-time job at a convenience store. And she is part of an after-school program that is designed to empower her and give her the skills and tools to be able to identify trafficking, to be able to speak up, against it when she sees it, to be a partner or a peer supporter, and to really think seriously about the future that she wants for herself. And she's very actively involved in that. And Janet is a facilitator for the program, and Janet teaches them about the tactics that are used by traffickers. They role play a trafficking scenario, how you can get out of it. They talk about different forms of exploitation, and the kids talk about what's happening in their neighborhood and why, and that content becomes what they role play about. And it's just a very supportive environment for these young people who want to make a good life for themselves and their families, to be able to keep themselves safe and develop the skills and confidence. So Fayette, one of the things, I forgot to say this, one of the things that's most important about this is that Janet begins every single session, and there are 18 sessions, with this. She says to them, "You are precious, you are capable, you are smart, and you are beautiful to behold." And the students repeat back, "I am precious, I am capable, I am smart, and I am beautiful to behold." So when Fayette graduated from this program, which was a big deal, they were on the stage of her high school, she stepped up, received her certificate, and she proudly stepped up to the podium and said, "I am precious, I am capable, I am smart, and I am beautiful to behold." Now, a few weeks later, Fayette was coming home from the convenience store where she worked at night, and she was assaulted, and it was an attempted kidnapping. She fought them off, but she was beaten badly, and she was raped. By the time the police got to her, she was in very bad shape, and she had to go to the hospital. Now, Janet, when she heard about this, was absolutely devastated, because Fayette was one of her favorites. And it was such a devastating situation. But Fayette had recognized what had happened, and she fought them off. So when Janet got to the hospital bed, there was Fayette, and she was all wrapped up in bandages, and she had bruises, and she had cuts, and she had a broken arm and broken ribs. And she couldn't help it. She just burst into tears. And Fayette said, "Oh, Miss Janet, don't worry. I am precious. I am capable. I am smart. And I am beautiful to behold. I'm going to be all right." And what Janet saw in her eyes was not that look that Summer Stephan was talking about, but a look of confidence for a young woman who had taken charge of her life. So that is a story that makes me want to devote my life to an issue such as this. So now I want to ask you for your story. Sorry, maybe I should have gone last. But it doesn't have to be a huge story like that. It could be anything. But why are you in this work? And what do you do? So we'll start with you, Ramesh.
Okay. I have a three-part answer. Not to make light of it, but when the executive vice chancellor calls you one afternoon and says, "Ramesh, we are going to do this, and we would like to put it at the Qualcomm Institute," even if you're on the phone, you stand up and you say, "Absolutely, we'll do everything we can to support the initiative." That actually is what happened, and we were delighted that Suresh thought of us as a place that might be able to help nurture this. The larger context is this institute was partly set up to use technology to address societal scale problems. That sounds like a grandiose statement, and I've always felt that way when it came to making social impact. But we took it to heart, and we've been attempting to find ways in which we could do that. So I personally interpret our involvement in social impact as searching for ways to use technology to address problems that we all know to be pervasive, that we all want to change, but what do we uniquely bring to the table? Part of what you also get to do as an academic is hang out with fellow academics like Jay and Anita, who I had been aware of from before based on their work on gender equity. And I remember a couple of years ago, I don't know if Jay remembers that I remember, but he made what I thought was a very thoughtful observation. He said, "We tend to look at human trafficking as a law enforcement problem, but is that the only way to look at it? Why not think of it as a public health problem, right? It struck me as something thoughtful, but I didn't know what one might do about it. Until years later, like 3 months ago, the thought crossed my mind that maybe if we view it as a public health problem, we should be thinking about a vaccine so we can inoculate the vulnerable population so they would know, they would be ready when the real thing happens. And then we were delighted that we built sort of a wonderful relationship with Dr. Leanne Chikarsky, who is in the audience. As many of you know, San Diego is known not only for wireless and communications, but it's also known for neurosciences. Leanne is a real neuroscientist. And what she has focused on in recent years is building neuro games, games that are designed by a neuroscientist who understands how the game can help you pick up on things, how to help you address things that are basically taking place in the various neural circuits, if you wish. So this vaccine ideally would be something that would train you to get suspicious when something unexpected comes your way, whether it's the woman who's offering you a drink even though you're underage, or who's offering you some other temptation. And what's interesting about this expertise, in my opinion, is you got to know you're targeting an audience that is perhaps used to blowing things off, that think of themselves as very savvy when they may not be. How do you know that you've gotten their attention? Do you really arouse their suspicion sufficiently so that the next time around this happens in real life, they actually have the right reaction, right? So to me, that's an example of how we have the expertise, the scholarship on an academic campus to come up with a solution that would scale very easily. So if we hit upon, as we hope we will, a game, it would be easy to distribute it to millions of people. What could be easier? It's viral already. So we are pushing forward on that path. That is an example. Now, if I want to get just a little tiny bit personal about it. I grew up in a part of India which is a very rough part of the world. To be honest, you witness and you put up with many inequities because there's nothing you can do. You're so terribly trapped in it that just knowing that someone is a victim, that this is unjust and that this is unfair, doesn't really alter circumstances readily. So you see this go on for years and years. And in many ways, technology, I think, is perhaps one of the more effective tools at disrupting it. This ability to build a community of people who have been fragmented, and that's partly how you exploit them, you isolate them. So we think technology has a key role to play. We think communication is at the heart of the problem and is also at the heart of the solution, and that's what we focus on here. So we think we have more than a peripheral role to play. We think we have a central role to play in addressing this.
I'm going to, you and I are going to share this one, and then Jay, I want to introduce each one. That was Ramesh Rao, who is the director of Qualcomm Institute, so we're delighted to be in his space. Thank you very much. Next is Jay Silverman, who is the director of research for UC San Diego Center on Gender Equity and Health. We just heard a little bit about that, but maybe then we can use these. Jay, since you're close to a microphone, would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Welcome to San Diego.
Thank you.
Gary, it's
So happy to be here.
To get to meet you.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Ramesh. She
I don't
actually.
think they can hear you.
Can you folks hear?
Can you hear him?
Is it better?
Yeah,
All
sit
right.
up.
Is that better?
There we go.
Sorry about that. I was thanking Ramesh because he actually introduced me to Leanne and her team, and I'm thrilled and honored to actually get to work with those folks, although I am not a brilliant tech person or neuroscientist. This is one of, I think, the examples that makes UCSD such a special place, that people really don't hesitate to work across disparate fields to take on complex issues, because that's the way we really do, make a difference. In academia, we tend to be very bad at that. Yeah. And there's no place that I've ever seen that works like this. So it's really an honor to be part of this institution. It's Also tremendously heartening to hear about the tremendous thinking and that's going on from so many individuals and institutions represented here on prevention. That's something that's relatively new to this issue, and that's sort of part of my thinking about this is as a public health issue that there are across the institutions, across all the realms of our lives, across all of these structures in schools, in law enforcement, in universities, in medical institutions, that change also needs to happen at all of these levels. But let me work backwards, I guess. I came to this issue based on having worked for the past, it's been a little over 25 years, in different organizations working around gender-based violence. First in community-based organizations and different state level government organizations and different universities and partnerships. And about a dozen years ago or so, maybe about 13 years ago now, I, like so many other people, saw a documentary on, it was focused really on what's happening with girls in Nepal around this issue. And I've particularly been focused in all of my research on adolescence. And what I very quickly saw in all that was represented, even at the level it can be in something like a documentary, that this really was a critical form of gender-based violence against women and girls. It happens to boys and men too, but it's the vast majority is against women and girls, and it's very, very gendered. The reasons that girls are vulnerable has to do with what it is, what is the status, what is the construction of what it is to be a girl across so many societies. And that as a researcher, we all bring different toolboxes, right? We all have different expertise, we all have different ways that we can make change. And as researchers, as a researcher, my thought was the research was not very strong. It's still, frankly, somewhat in its infancy. And so, we've set about to try to partner with folks and do innovative research to really shed light, to build evidence base, and to inform prevention efforts around this. And it's such an amazing thing to see this campus and our partners coming together at so many levels around this. I don't believe there's any other campus in this country who is trying to do all of this, and I'm really excited and really confident that together with all of our stakeholders here at the university and across the city, that we really are going to do something that's going to make a difference and hopefully provides a model for communities and universities everywhere.
Thank you, Jay. Akshay is the co-director of the Center for Information Convergence and Strategy, and we're so delighted to welcome you here.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to Nyla and Feroza for inviting me to be here today. My background is Homeland Security and technology, sort of fusioning that together, spending a lot of time in terms of giving dots on the map so the good guys can take them off. Moved into the space from trying to work on counter-narcotics and then into counterterrorism. There was a huge overlap in human trafficking, right? Basically, to understand the domain that this whole sits in, and sort of the base map that's involved, it's to understand what the relations is in policy, culture, enforcement, and people over space and time. Once you can understand that, you can break down this notion of geospatial analysis and say, look, this is how they're moving, and there are many attributes that are in common besides the color of their skin, besides where they're from, besides where they're going, right? And there is very strong economic principles at play, supply and demand, right? That's also there. A person costs less today than they did in any time in history, right? So this is a very interesting thought. Where other things, we are talking to people with real cases. I've called Summer Stefan when she's on vacation, where she's called back and arranged for people to be moved into shelters, right? And she was an ADA at the time. So these are people playing in the real field, but so are the other guys, right? So the intel and counter-intel works together. So as we are sitting here discussing, how many of you heard the phrase, see something, say something? Right, and how many of us choose not to see something? Right? So this is the actual, with the footprint that we have in the space is very high. We've all had a meal today. What part of that is from the trafficking domain? Right? If you got your car washed, what part of that is from the trafficking domain? The question that was asked here is, why are we in the space? It's because I'm a San Diegan. I went to local elementary school, junior high, high school, right? This is my hometown. And this is a living lab in the space of study because we are in the border region, right? We're a living laboratory. So as a researcher, it's very hard not to observe. But it's all over you. I've owned restaurants in this area, many of you know, right? I've owned businesses. I run a research center. I'm also the director for Border Poll's Digital Borders program, right? So I train quite a bit in the space of customs and border security. Give lectures to even the CBP here and all over the world. So we train people to look for things. And I was just speaking to someone earlier about this. We tell agents to watch out for certain things. For example, you ask a CBP agent, what are you looking for? People violating visas, people coming in with this, and all of a sudden they drop a word, WMD. And you ask them, can you tell me what a WMD looks like? Can any of you? Right? So human trafficking is in one of those things. People smuggle humans because it's easier to get them through in the front seat of a car than take 2 kilos of cocaine through in a brick and through the car, right? And you can repeatedly sell a human being. You can't repeatedly sell narcotics. So there are key elements that are part of this domain that makes it exist. But the number one reason is there's people here that will use it, right? There's users that are behind this. Same reason why the United States consumes so much narcotics, because there are users in this country. Not because one country is producing it, it's because we have a demand. So it's almost, as we look at vaccines, we should understand we might have to inject ourselves with it first, right? Instead of looking for patients for trial, let's all take that vaccine and shoot ourselves with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Elisa Omar, who's an advocate and educator and founder and executive director of Breaking the Silence Together. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
This is a very diverse panel.
Well, I'm here because Nyla invited me after Anita was in the Me Too march that I organized. Let me take right off the bat your guess, where am I from? No, I'm not Mexican, and I'm not from the East Coast. I'm from Israel. I'm going to make it really short, and I guess you will have the panel. So for 45 years, I've lived in silence. Well, I left Israel originally because I was illiterate. It's so hard to see. I feel like I'm in interrogation here. I left Israel because I was illiterate. I was a woman. I didn't feel like I had any future. I worked in the entertainment business, and somebody said, where would you like to fly if you could? I said, New York. The next week I got a ticket to New York, and I moved to Hollywood, and I worked in Hollywood, and everything happened in Hollywood, and I came out as a lesbian, and I moved to San Francisco, and that's where my real journey began. I met a therapist, and for 3 years I gained his trust. And I start sharing certain things, and I said, this is what happened. He says, well, that's rape. And I said, what is this? And he says, that's rape. And what it is, that's rape. And initially I realized I was raped from age of 6 to 27. And one of the incidents that happened at age of 21, after I completed the military service, I wanted to move from the kibbutz that I grew up to the big city of Tel Aviv, because everybody wants to live in Tel Aviv. It's like living in New York. So I saw an ad in the newspaper, and I made an appointment. And that in that interview, I was raped, videotaped for the distribution of pornography. And so I decided that I'm no longer going to live in silence, and I sold everything in San Francisco and moved to Israel, thinking it only happened to me. Because if I lived in silence, if I didn't share, I didn't know. So I went to Israel, and I organized a cross-country bike ride to tell the country that I'm no longer ashamed and afraid. And I thought I will find someone who would ride in the car behind me so no one would kill me. And I have a little sign that says, I'm breaking the silence. Little I knew that I was not alone. When the media took liking to my story, all of a sudden it became not just me breaking the silence about my story, but thousands of other people, women, girls, and surprisingly, I didn't know, men too. So from there on, my voice in the cross-country bike ride was everyone's voice. And then there was an incident of the ex-president who was accused of rape and sexual assault, and the country said, no, it's not possible, it's impossible. And I says, well, I'll show you that it is possible. And I stood up again and organized a march, and he received 7 years in jail, which was his deserve, yeah. Yeah, thank you. So then I came back to San Diego from Israel. I thought, damn, if that happened in Israel, what happened around the world? So I went to one of my favorite countries, India. I went to Nepal, I went to Thailand, I met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I met with Meiji Sansani, just to investigate what really is going on. And I'm not going to bore you here what's really going on, because the panel, you asked question. But then I asked my colleague, Kathy, so if I was videotaped for the distribution of pornography, what does that make me? She goes, well, you've been trafficked for sex. And that pissed me off, because the video is up on the internet, and somebody out there think that I have consent to it. And I said, I no longer am going to live in silence. So what I've really learned is silence weakened me and sharing strengthened me. And that's part of the message I'm taking into this world and into these people, to say, it didn't happen just to you. There's many other people. And the first step of healing is by breaking your silence. As Anita know, we, in the Me Too march, a 17-year-old girl, I still call her girl, broke her silence on a national TV, and that was the first time her mom heard about that. So right there, her mom came up to me sobbing, and I didn't know why until I saw that. And so the healing for them started right there. And so I'm committed to really make a difference, and I probably will share more, but this is in short why I'm here.
What a powerful story. Thank you so much. This is Anita Raj, Director of UC San Diego Center on Gender Equity and Health. So happy to have you here, Anita.
Thanks. So I'm a professor here in the School of Medicine, and about 6 or 7 years ago, Jay and I came to San Diego, and we both had respective careers focused on issues of gender equity and violence against women. And when we got here from the East Coast, we very soon got a lot of support from people like Ramesh and Suresh and Pradeep, and we held an event very early on that was focused on the International Day of the Girl Child to talk about the very issues that some of what we're talking about here today, but just broadly speaking, what gender equity means and how unequal treatment, opportunity, status of women and girls in society across the world is compromising the health of populations. And I'm here because, frankly, we were placed, I had research skills, and this was a passion area. I don't think you can be a woman interfacing with society without having had some experience. I would love to say that it's the 30% or 40% reporting sexual harassment. I don't believe that's the case. I think 100% of women, every woman I've ever known has
You saw the hands earlier.
Yeah. So I don't know. For me, this was there's personal situations of harassment that I've faced, and doing the research to think about, and certainly people I've known have had experiences far worse, and knowing the health consequence of that just empowered me to want to do more work around using research and evidence to create change. And so I think that was something we shared, and when we got to San Diego, we found a number of other people, a number of other researchers within our public health sphere that were interested in that work. But I really want to give a lot of credit to the leadership at UC San Diego, because they did something that was, I think, really important in terms of giving us a platform. By developing the center, we were able to sort of converge to bring a greater voice to the research that we do. And I want to just take a very brief moment to talk about the research. So first of all, you're looking at the most published author in the area of sex trafficking as a public health issue, which is Dr. J. Silverman. Not a bad piece of representation.
That's my wife.
Yeah.
but
you can PubMed him and get verification. I only present solid research evidence. So, but that's just one piece of where we've gained strength in terms of the research we do. As we came together, we were already doing a lot of work in the area of gender-based violence, its intersection with sexual and reproductive health, on the issues of child marriage, and stemming a lot from Jay's work and just our increasing passion around really bringing a focus to the issue of sexual violence. I would actually argue that we have I believe we have the largest portfolio on the issues of sexual violence, sex trafficking, and sexual exploitation of any research group in the country. And I'm just going to give you a few glimpses of some of the work we're doing. So I have an opportunity to work with Dr. Lotus McDougall. We've been doing, and we're both here at UCSD, we've been doing research in India on the issue of looking at crime data related to sexual assaults since the Delhi rape that many of you may be familiar with, the Nirbhaya case, and documenting what the role of having women police in the districts has on women coming forward with rape cases, to give better guidance for policymakers to understand the vital role of women police officers in their districts. But what we're also finding is what we're seeing is a Delhi effect, which is when the Delhi rape occurred, there was an increase in reporting, and that seemed to be proximal geographically to being in Delhi. And so what we feel is that there's also just the issue of the way social norms change, the way breaking the silence changed, the way giving voice to a woman named Jyoti changed, and said, no, this is not a woman who did anything wrong. This is a group of men who did something gravely wrong and needed to be penalized for it. So that's some of the work we do, and we work with the policymakers in India on that. We're also working, Jay is actually leading the the California Department of Public Health on evaluation of rape prevention programs. Dr. Jennifer Wagman is leading the University of California system on exploring and understanding the climate of sexual harassment and assault here in California in our UC system. One of our students who has been working with us on the issue of campus sexual assault actually got a White House Champion of Change Award, and thank you, Suresh, because he supported her financially, or his office, I should say, supported her financially to be able to go to the White House, and she was able to meet Barack Obama and Joe Biden. And so
this is an incredible center. You can see. I think we're going to leave it there because I really want to get to a few more
Can
people.
I say one more, and then I promise I'll end it.
Okay.
We're also working with the NFL to do prevention of sexual assault in sport, and that actually is something that's going to be happening here on this campus in just 2 weeks.
That's so exciting. Thank you, Anita. Next, we have Todd Hammond, who's a supervisory special agent for the FBI, and we've worked together, and I'm so happy to have you here, Todd.
Thank you. Thank you so
Want to say
much.
a few words?
Yes, very briefly, my name's Todd Hammond. I've been in the FBI for about 13 years, 9 of which I've worked as an investigator, primarily in gangs, drugs, and violent crime. And for the past 4 as a supervisor. I've been in my current position for about a year and a half, which is the supervisor of the FBI's San Diego squad responsible for human trafficking and civil rights.
Thank you so much, Todd. Yay. And last but certainly not least, I'm delighted to introduce Mari Hernandez, who is the education chair of UC San Diego's Circle K, which is a very large organization, and she brings many stakeholders together for this issue. So Mari Cres.
Sorry. Hi. So first I'd like to thank Nyla for inviting our committee here. So I'm an undergraduate student in a awareness committee right now for human trafficking. And so first, like, how I got into this. So prior to starting my undergraduate career here at UCSD, I did not know very much about human trafficking. It was something that I felt was very far off for me, like many of the speakers said earlier. I just felt disconnected and disengaged from it. And so when I came to UCSD, I started to learn more about it, and I realized that it's something very real and very wrong, and it's happening. And so with UCSD, I feel that they have like promoted a lot to their students to work for change and to use their voice to make something happen, and which is so that is why I am here today, to try and talk more about it and to like raise awareness for it. And sorry. So yeah, that's basically why I'm here today, and why my committee, although we're very small and we don't have like much resources at the moment, we're trying to do the best we can, and which is just to inform ourselves and to inform others, which we believe is like where it all starts and how people start to get into it and work more towards it. So yeah.
Thank you, Maricruz. We're so happy to have you there. So I have one question for each person, and let's try to keep the answer to like 3 minutes, and then I have a couple questions that I want to ask everyone if we get to that, okay? So, Jay, let's start with you. I mean, we've heard your credentials. You're an incredible researcher and a voice around gender-based violence and sexual assault and human trafficking. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the intersections between violence against women and girls and human trafficking, and what is it about that sort of intersectionality that isn't so important?
Oh, thanks so much. I'll definitely try to be brief. Steph and our esteemed DA spoke to this, I think, quite eloquently, that the intersections, I mean, there's more than an intersection, there's a full overlap. For the most part, when we've done our studies, and this is across maybe 5 continents now, we have consistently found, including just 25 miles away in Tijuana here, that the reasons that young girls, women are becoming vulnerable, the main reason is they are leaving a situation in which they are being abused or other people in their household are being abused. And the reason how they become trafficked is most frequently because of somebody posing as a male romantic partner who grooms them, is there saying is going to protect them now in this vulnerable state since they've left home, and ends up exploiting them and trafficking them. And then of course, maybe the most obvious is that young girls who are trafficked, and this is a very important point, as opposed to thinking about women in the sex trade and prostitution, adults, that children, adolescents who are in the sex trade, they have a very different experience, regardless of how they came in there. There are so many more times likely to be experiencing horrendous forms of sexual violence and confinement, and relatedly being infected with, if the disease is around, HIV at very, very high rates. So it's really at every level. I believe very strongly that this is a form of gender-based violence, and that as we have gotten to over these many years thinking about domestic violence, gender-based violence as a public health issue that should be understood and prevented, so too I feel like we're finally getting to that point with trafficking, and finally there is the work, and there we very much led by this university to move forward to build that work.
Thank you so much. Anita, this is a related question because you work together, but what is the intersection between violence against women and girls and people who have been exposed to sexual violence especially, and domestic labor, domestic servitude, debt bondage? We heard a little bit about that before, that we think it doesn't exist in this country, but we know that it does. But could you speak to that a little bit, about the intersection between sex trafficking and labor trafficking? And we know that labor trafficking is an even bigger problem than sex trafficking. So maybe you could speak to that.
So I actually think Jay would I actually think Jay would be better at speaking to that than I would, but I think that the gendered aspects of it are key in terms of that element of it, that women and girls are disproportionately at risk for trafficking, and that seems to be in even more the case. And you look at sexual exploitation and sex trafficking, and the younger age, I'm looking at him because I'm just going to make sure, there's just a heightened vulnerability with regard to that.
Right.
Just in the context of labor, we know, right, all around us that women are exploited in many ways,
Right.
including sexually, but also obviously economically in labor trafficking.
And there are particular industries that are more vulnerable to this than others. And we heard about the janitorial, but maybe you could talk about some of those other industries.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you some examples that we've seen, entertainment, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what I haven't worked in the entertainment industry, but we know that women in bars and clubs are particularly vulnerable, and we hear a lot of stories about the use of substances. In fact, sometimes actually getting girls at young ages to almost encourage an addiction because it makes people more reliant.
Right, absolutely. Creates a dependency.
Yeah.
And also the hotel industry.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, I think that any form, the vulnerability of immigrants who don't have papers under any circumstances, I think is very high. But I have heard more, like on the border, that there's also this issue. So there's someone on our team, Dr. Elizabeth Reed, who's been doing some work around in National City. And there's a lot of vulnerability for these girls. They are citizens. They were born here, but the parents are not. And so there's not really adults overseeing them. And so they'll get jobs or whatever, and that's exposing them, because sometimes it's not through schools. Sometimes people know in schools, but schools can be kind of a protective atmosphere for a lot of girls. But when they're getting these after-school jobs, there's a greater awareness. Somebody will walk them home, find out that there's nobody home.
Right.
So I think
true.
it's age-related as well.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. You know, Elisa, you are talking very powerfully, and I thank you for sharing your personal story. I, too, am a sexual assault survivor over multiple years, so I'm really grateful for your courage. Maybe you could speak about the Me Too movement and what it has meant for people, and is there a way for that to become a way to break the silence around human trafficking as well? Not only about sexual assault and harassment, but also getting human trafficking out there. Because I think a lot of people don't really understand what human trafficking is. People think that it's something that happens to poor people in other countries. So is the Me Too movement something that you're very familiar with and really helped to found? Is that something that can be used to elevate the whole issue of human trafficking?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I wanted to say something that Kathy and I are working in conjunction with North County Lifeline. So if any of you know any victim or anyone you might suspect that needs some services, please come to us and we'll give you their number. And they provide free services if they have a grant for it. Well, the Me Too movement started with Hollywood.
Yeah.
So Hollywood women, just imagine, they have everything. They have power, prestige, fame. And these women lived in silence for over 30 years. I mean, imagine Angelina Jolie living in silence, sharing about her sexual assault and sexual abuse or other people. If they lived over 30 years in silence, imagine how many women locally and globally dealing with it on a daily basis. So I say, Hollywood put a saddle on a horse for me and I took a ride.
Wow.
Because
Great analogy.
I started,
Great analogy.
Thank you. I took that and created a Me Too March, which has been now spread in several places. And the Me Too movement is basically comes to let people know that they're not alone. And just imagine if every one of them says Me Too, how many people are out there. With all due respect to statistics, I found that statistics speaks to the people like myself and Kathy who are speaking. What about the millions of people who are not speaking that are out there? And I found through public events that people are finding the courage and the strength to speak out, because if I speak like what you just did, you demonstrated like classic. I shared and you said, well, I experienced the same thing. Would you just sit here and says you experience? Might not, because it's a very vulnerable place to be in. So if people understand the magnitude of human sex trafficking, your hair would stand. Just alone in San Diego area, the trafficker makes $800 million a year, and the victims make nothing. These people, Kathy and I work in 3 different places with them. And my heart, and I'm sure Kathy's heart, is broken, and we are committed. It takes more than a village to actually combat human sex trafficking. So what we share with you here, we don't share to put darkness on you. We share so maybe you find someplace in your heart to actually stand up and take action in your community. We need everyone. We have as a survivors, Kathy survivors herself, we have a very minimum grants, so our hands are tied. I want to touch on something because it's such a huge subject.
Huge issue. It's a huge issue.
It is huge, and one of the problems we cannot combat right now is because in San Diego alone, we have over 2,000 women, girls, and boys who are suffering in this crime, but we have only 32 beds to put them in.
I know, it's really horrific.
Right?
Yeah.
So our hands are tied. We have women who wants to come out of the life. We wanted to help them. We have North County Lifeline, but we have nowhere to put them. Now, most of you think this happened only to women of color, young girls. But what if I tell you that this crime and this epidemic affect the LGBT community like you would never imagine? So imagine these people are rejected from their family and they have no place to go. They're living on the street. Guess what? The traffickers know the color of vulnerability. Within 48 hours, they would be trafficked for sex, and some of them would even be killed. So to emphasize, and I know we have a very short time because this is a huge subject. If I can just say, I walked into a brothel in Calcutta. I met the Hiltons, the Calcutta Hiltons, but I wanted to see for myself, so I don't tell you somebody share with me. I wanted to see it. Young girls from Nepal who have been promised a life of glory and sunshine have come, and there's one thing that separates between hell and heaven is a curtain, because the moment you walk in, these women are in hell and they have no voice. And I committed that I would come and share this with you, and I'm committed to share it with the women who are right now in juvenile hall, in jail, who are suffering from the consequences. And one of the impact that we have on us, it's so shameful, it's so painful to open this issue. That's why we go into drugs. That's why we go into alcohol. That's why we go into destructive behavior.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean,
it's
a
terrible issue, and I'm really grateful for your passion. You know, I heard an astounding statistic actually from Summer Stephan. She told me that the average lifespan for someone who has entered this industry, so to speak, captured in that industry, is 7 years if they don't get out. So now the average age in San Diego of entry into this, of being trafficked, is 16 years. 23 years old, that person will be dead because of suicide, because of drugs, or violence at the hand of either a customer or a pimp.
And the pimps knows it very well. So the first things they do, they give them drugs, they get them hooked, and all of a sudden they're hooked and there's no way for them. We're dealing with a woman who's 14 years old, and if you would hear her language, you would be astonished. She does not know anything but crime, violence, and she lives in the ghetto. She lives with gang member, and she sounds like she knows it all because that's what they are growing into, and that's where they will come into this world. So like you, we teach them a lot of affirmation, positive impact. We are giving them different language, but it's, let me tell you, penetrate concrete with your nails is easy.
It's tough.
but we are doing one step at a time. And I believe that we will conquer that. But just know that it takes really more than the village. We all have to stand up and rise for the occasion to save them. Because one more last thing. In 3 weeks, the biggest event in America is going to take place. So you and I are going to sit home and watch on our 43 inches TV, colorful with friends, drinking beer and wine and taking a nice shower in the morning. That will not be possible for a lot of them. Over 10,000 women in one weekend would be trafficked for sex. I wanted to share.
You're talking about the Super Bowl, right?
The Super Bowl is the number one human trafficking event in America. And I'm going to share with the last story that I have. I drove to Arizona when the Super Bowl was there to train doctors and nurses, and I took my shoes. I created an art display of shoes. Every shoe represents a woman, a girl, or a child that is or has been trafficked for sex. So I went to the Super Bowl experience they had it before the Super Bowl. That was on Saturday. And I bypassed the police and everyone. You're not supposed to bring stick or anything, but I brought my sign, human trafficking not in my Super Bowl, don't buy women. And this guy came up to me like this huge guy. This is not the right place. I says, well, I know. But just imagine if it was your daughter. It changed his life. I mean, this man just covered up, went next to his wife, and said nothing. Mm-hmm. So this is the education that we need.
We have to make it personal to everyone.
Totally. And I took the chance that I might beaten up, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
But it was important. And the moment I said to him, imagine if it had happened to your daughter. That changed something in this man who leaned on the fence and did not, and I watched him, did not move.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, Chris, I want to go to you. First of all, I thank you for your bravery and for what you do here at UCSD. You're a student. So what do you think are the opportunities for students? What should we be doing here in this university community? How can we reach other students?
So for reaching other students, I feel like a lot of people don't pay attention to things like these just because they feel like it's not related to them at all, mm-hmm. or they just feel disconnected from it. So I feel like to reach other students, you would have, like, the first thing is just to find a way to make them, like, see it, first of all, like, just to see that it is there, that it is real. In terms of, like, awareness, I feel like tailoring it to how students would respond to it is important. So, yeah.
No, tailoring it to other students.
Oh, yeah, so yeah. Tailoring to, like, important to tailor to how they would respond to it so that they would understand, and then they would be able to, like, practice safe practices so that, like, they could prevent it for themselves, and to also, like, try to interact, like, and work to change it. Yeah.
Do you think that arts and like song or dance or theater are important ways to reach out to your community?
Yeah. I feel like showing it appropriately in, like, art and media and, like, pop culture and things like that is very important, because I feel that is, like, something that catches people's eye a lot and, like, is what a lot of people think about as well. And it's something that they will want to see and not, like, just hear words and stuff.
Yeah. So it has to be attractive to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, one of the things I'm learning from all of you is we have to make it personal. It has to be personal to every single one of us. That's one of the reasons why I started with tell us something about you, so that we can get to know you as people. It's got to be personal. Todd, talk about personal. I remember having a conversation with you about who exactly are these buyers. We heard from Arkshad that one of the reasons this industry is so driven is because there is a demand. Who are the buyers and who are the traffickers?
So the buyers can really be anyone. It's I think one of the more astounding aspects of human trafficking is there's no profile for a buyer. It could be someone from the most educated background. It could be someone with very little education. Age range, race range, there's really no set buyer, which makes approaching demand difficult. As a federal law enforcement agent, we don't necessarily have extensive federal laws to target the buyers. It's generally more of a state issue. But even amongst state law enforcement, going after demand, it's very difficult just because there really is no set format for these buyers, no set profile.
Thank you.
And you mentioned the traffickers. So traffickers is a much different scenario. So with buyers, there is this unknown quality to them, or they may be purchasing someone who is willingly involved in the sex trade, and by that I mean prostitution, or they may be purchasing someone who is a victim of human trafficking. There may not always be that acknowledgement. I'm not excusing prostitution by any means, but from the buyer mentality, it's simply purchasing for sex. Now with traffickers, it is very well defined what trafficking is: force, fraud, coercion. So these are individuals that are intentionally involved in this trade. So we do see maybe more commonalities amongst this background, but it's more of the psychological component of a trafficker. So traffickers are someone that we do have the benefit of federal laws to help prosecute, and some pretty aggressive federal laws.
Thank you so much. Arshad and Ramesh, both of you talked earlier when you gave your introduction about the work that you've done and the ways in which you use data and technology to both identify who the traffickers are, but also to reach out. And Ramesh, we had quite a long conversation about this about a month and a half ago. Also to see if we can reach out to those at risk, especially young people, before the traffickers got there. So Ramesh, I wonder if you could talk about that. How do we disrupt the social media conduit from trafficker to vulnerable youth? And then Akshay, if you could talk about how we use data to identify, big data sets to be able to identify people. And we have about a total of 5 minutes each, and I apologize, but I want to give an opportunity to the audience. So, and I know there'll be other questions about this.
Sure, I'll be really brief. I think it's increasingly clear that our activity, for example, on social media, reveals not just our overt likes and dislikes, but our mental condition. And this has been monetized extensively by marketeers. And in recent months, years, the political forces, if you wish, right? So there is no doubt that there is, when you have enough data, you can infer many things that people may not think they are revealing through their interactions. I believe with social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook and so on, you can identify who is a trafficked victim. You can identify who is a trafficker, not with 100% certainty, but with a fair amount of certainty. And I think you can build tools that will allow you to work on scale, so you can address these issues at a population level and not just chase one individual after another, which is necessary but is very expensive and prohibitive. So in a strange new way, data science will enable new mechanisms for detection and intervention.
I remember you told me something that really shocked me. You said, your cell phone knows you better than you know yourself. Arshad.
Yeah, I'll pick up where Ramesh left off. I'll talk about the challenges, right? So non-federated cryptographic protocols that has end-to-end encryption, they make it very difficult for law enforcement to understand the messaging that's behind it. We have groups that are sitting in, like for example, Black Death web group websites in the dark web that's being operated. The administrator's email was pimp_alex_91 at hotmail.com. So the intention, the word pimp being put into it, makes the intention very clear, what the intention of such organizations are. So there are a few things in the world of semantic web and understanding what's going on in semantic communications and clouding and seeding. There are 6 elements. First one is profiling, the act of profiling and the communication that goes to it. Second one is the pretender status, where you pretend to be the boyfriend or the big sister or big father figure. Then you go into the provider phase. Then moving on to the promiser, the protector, and then the punisher. Each one has its own communication, language, and semantic behind it. The ability to understand this and track this fast enough will help detect it. But having said that, it's not the technology that's going to win this war. It's stronger communities, stronger families, stronger friends, and stronger neighbors, right? Because it's a gap that this disease has taken over, right? We have to fill the void, and we have to treat the actual problem, not the symptoms, right? So this is an important thing to understand. We can keep feeding drugs into this thing just to treat each symptom, but the actual problem, it's community breaking down. Because just the earlier question, who are the people? These are the people right here.
We're all
So,
they are we.
I mean,
We're
this is
not the
us.
enemy, and it is
So
us.
if you do a 360 camera, that's what it looks like, right? It could be a professor, it could be a doctor, it could be a policeman. This is why it's hard to tell. Girls don't even go for help, or boys, or anyone who's involved. Because the person who wore that uniform or the suit, they saw them in that room opening that curtain. So when you say, why didn't you run across the street for help? Well, why would they?
Could you explain for us here, what is the dark web?
Well,
A lot of people don't know, so I'm asking the question.
it's very dark. So it's basically not indexed, right? So it's being set up between networks that are not publicly listed. You're not going to the Google. So there's onion sites and all these things set up so people can go in there and buy drugs, right? But everybody else has it. Like Facebook has an onion site. There are Dropbox sites that you can go in there and drop stuff. WikiLeaks have them. So it's not just used for human trafficking. But what has happened is a pivotal change. Trafficking of commodities, humans became a commodity, right? That's being trafficked. So this was used for drugs and other commodities being trafficked all along. But humans are now another commodity.
Another commodity, yeah. Okay, time for questions from the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand, and then we have a microphone. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Hello, my name's Leslie. Thank you for being here today. I'm a PhD student in education studies here at UCSD. And you said that the average age of someone being trafficked is 16. So that's obviously a school-aged age. So what is being done to inform school teachers and other education personnel about this issue?
That is a great question.
First of all, the age of entering to human sex trafficking is 12.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else on the panel want to answer that? I know a little bit about the subject, but I want to offer the panel an opportunity to talk about it. Okay, well, I guess, thank you very much for that question, because I will speak about a little bit more. I mentioned earlier about thank you very much, Ramesh, you're stronger than I am, about our collaborative. And this is a collaborative that works with teachers and students, and also is an advocacy platform. So it's there's an organization called Protect that has developed an incredible online training program for teachers and students, starting as young as 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, and 11th grade, with age-appropriate content, and that's complemented with training for the teachers at that age. So it's not just online, it's the beginning of a dialogue between teacher and student on very complex issues, starting with things like healthy relationships, what is an appropriate way of talking to a person of the opposite sex. Eventually you get into things like what is trafficking and who might traffickers be, and then eventually by the time they're in 11th grade, they're having real conversations and role plays about trafficking, other forms of exploitation and sexual violence. It's an evidence-based program. It's been tested many times, and it has built-in metrics so we can see the scores. And we're so very grateful to have our partners from Protect who are leading this effort. This is accompanied by an effort called No More, which is a local organization that within this, with high schools, is an after-school program that allows students to really act. It's a theater program, and they act out real scenarios. They bring scenarios to the No More venue, and it's an opportunity, and this is why, Mari Chris, I was so interested in what you had to say about how theater is such an important way for people to both express themselves and talk about things that are troubling them, but also to educate, because that's what is attractive to their peers. So it's a wonderful way not only to change the lives and offer the participants the ability to talk about what's happening in their lives, but it also is a powerful way to educate their peers. And then PCI is working, my organization, Project Concern International, is working in high-risk areas. So these are the zip codes where the likelihood of trafficking is the highest in after-school programs. And we work with the Boys and Girls Clubs, we work with the YMCAs, we hope, we're just beginning that, and we're working with the San Diego Unified School District in girls-only and boys-only curricula. These are 18-week sessions, very intensive, also talking about trafficking, the tactics used by traffickers, giving them life skills, but especially the safe space to be able to talk about things that are troubling them, what they're seeing in their homes and their communities, and giving them the skills and the tools to be able to speak up, to talk to their peers, and helping them know where to go if they see or experience any kind of, not only trafficking, but any kind of exploitation. So that's what we're doing here. It's phenomenal, and we're very grateful to UBS because they are supporting us in this, among many others. Another question. Sure, yes. Oh, one more. I'm sorry. You and then you. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is MJ Vargas, and I'm a part of the Rady School of Management. I'm also a birth doula, and I'm very interested in everything that has been spoken about today. And I found what you all mentioned about HIV being spread, something very important to know as a public health issue. My question and my interest and curiosity is in the pregnancies that result from all of what we're talking about today. Would you just speak to that, please?
I'll speak to it briefly, and maybe this pregnancy actually plays is a really important role in at least what's happening here locally and across the border in Tijuana, that 60% of the young women who had been trafficked had been pregnant at very early ages, and it preceded them being trafficked, into the sex industry. So it's actually a really critical aspect of vulnerability, and also critical opportunity actually to intervene. That is something we're actively working on actually right now, because let's say in the case of Tijuana, to deliver your child in the public hospital, you have to register that pregnancy at some point. Typically people do it in the third trimester. Based on age, and that's an opportunity to intervene, a critical opportunity to intervene, because children are then, both pregnancy and young children are used against young women to keep them, doing exactly what we want, basically the threat of harm to those children, and the desperate need for a young mother, often who has been isolated and very vulnerable, to provide for her child. In terms of what happens after somebody's been trafficked, pregnancy is extremely common, and what is also extremely common is unsafe abortion, and that is a tremendous threat to the life of young women as well. I mean, there are cases where those things where children are kept and then used against them, but also I think more frequently, unsafe abortion is often what they're experiencing.
Thank you so much, Jay. And one last question, it has to be quick.
Well, first of all, thank you to all of you and everything you've put into this program. I want to say me too. There's always strength in that. And my question is, has there been a conversation, and if not, could you consider one, around actually incorporating this into curriculum? We know how many things need to be part of curriculum. I understand that. I've been involved with the UC for a long time, and I just retired. But having worked for students with disabilities, another vulnerable population, I recognize the need for this to permeate curriculum, just like everything else that we've become aware of. So I'm just putting it out there. How can we get that to move into it, it not just in certain areas, but across the curriculum? I can't think of any piece of curriculum that can't be a means to broaden this awareness and get people thinking about it, brainstorming, whatever. We need them as well. We need this to happen.
It's a great idea, and that's why that law that Summer Stephan was talking about was so important. And I think it's food for thought for those of us here that are associated
University
with
curriculum is what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
because I think, we talked about what's happening in the high school, but in universities. So one last comment.
Yeah, I mean, just even at the high school level, 2 decades ago, I was one of the peer officers for Scripps Ranch High School's peer program. So somewhere between the DARE program and sex education, this should be plugged in. Right? So there's a gap in the program, and peer education, if you go back there, hasn't changed much. So, and by the time they get to the university, they've already been taken with the age. So before they're taken, we need to do this. It has to be proactive.